The rain poured relentlessly over the city, turning the streets into shimmering rivers of reflection. Neon lights flickered through the downpour, casting a kaleidoscope of colors onto the wet pavement, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. Oliver Hastings, a successful billionaire known for his sharp business acumen and cold demeanor, was returning from a high-profile charity gala. His tailored suit clung to his body, the fabric drenched and heavy, but he paid little mind to his discomfort. His thoughts were elsewhere, circling around the speeches he had made about philanthropy and community, words that now felt hollow against the backdrop of his solitary existence. As he turned a corner, a figure caught his eye. Huddled beneath the awning of a dilapidated building was a man, drenched to the bone, his clothes tattered and clinging to his gaunt frame. The man's face was obscured by shadows, but Oliver could see the weariness etched into his features, a lifetime of struggle apparent in the lines of his skin. Something about the man's expression stirred an unfamiliar feeling within Oliver, a flicker of compassion that he had long since buried beneath layers of ambition and wealth. "Hey!" Oliver called out, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Are you all right?" The man looked up, startled. His eyes, a deep shade of blue, met Oliver's with an intensity that momentarily held the billionaire in place. "I'm fine," he replied, though the tremor in his voice contradicted his words. "Just trying to stay dry." "Come on, it's pouring out here," Oliver insisted, stepping closer, the rain drenching him further. "I can't just leave you like this. How about you come to my place? At least until the storm passes?" The man hesitated, skepticism flickering across his face. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Oliver shrugged, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're right. I don't. But I can't just pretend I didn't see you. Please, let me help." After a moment of silence, the man slowly nodded. "All right. But I'm not looking for charity." "Neither am I," Oliver replied, already feeling the weight of the moment shift. "Just a warm place to wait out the storm." The two men walked side by side, the rain drenching them as they made their way to Oliver's upscale apartment. The lobby was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, wet world outside. Oliver gestured for the man to take a seat on a plush couch while he grabbed a couple of towels from the staff room. "Here, dry off a bit," Oliver said, handing the towels over. The man accepted them hesitantly, still eyeing Oliver with suspicion. "Thank you," he murmured, beginning to pat his hair down as Oliver took a seat across from him. "I'm not used to this kind of kindness." "Most people aren't," Oliver replied, leaning forward. "What's your name?" "James," the man said softly, his eyes darting around the luxurious space. "And you?" "Oliver Hastings," he introduced himself, watching as James's expression shifted from caution to recognition. "Wait, you're that billionaire," James said, his voice low. "The one who gives millions to charities?" "I try," Oliver replied, though a hint of discomfort seeped into his tone. "But I think kindness is more than just writing checks." James chuckled softly, a sound that was more bitter than joyful. "Tell that to the people who pass by without a second glance. I've seen more kindness from strangers like you on a rainy night than from those who claim to care." Oliver felt a pang of guilt as he absorbed James's words, a realization that struck a chord deep within him. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice gentle. James paused, taking a deep breath as he considered his next words. "Life has a way of knocking you down, you know? One moment, you think you have everything, and the next, it's all gone." Oliver nodded, trying to grasp the weight of James's statement. "If you don't mind sharing, what led you here?" James looked out the window, the rain streaking down the glass as if mirroring the storms of his life. "I had a family once, people who loved me, but an accident took it all away. I lost my wife and my son that day." "I'm sorry," Oliver murmured, feeling a heaviness settle in the room. "That's unimaginable." "It was a long time ago," James replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the pain, it never really goes away." He paused, his gaze returning to Oliver. "And I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. I didn't know how to be me again." Oliver felt a knot forming in his stomach as he listened, drawn into James's story of loss and despair. "What about your family?" Did you ever try to find them? I did, James said, his eyes glazing over with memories. But when I learned they thought I was dead, I couldn't bring myself to reach out. I thought it would be better for them if I just stayed away. I didn't want to disrupt their lives. Yet here you are, Oliver said, his heart aching for the man in front of him. Living in the streets alone? James shrugged, the casual motion belying the depth of his sorrow. Sometimes, it's easier to be invisible. It hurts less. Oliver's breath caught in his throat as he processed the weight of James's words. You don't have to be invisible anymore, you know? If you want, I can help you. James looked at him, a mixture of hope and skepticism in his eyes. Help? Like how? I can offer you a place to stay, support, whatever you need to get back on your feet, Oliver said, his voice firm. I have resources and connections. You don't have to go back to that life. James's expression shifted, vulnerability etched across his features. And what's the catch? There's always a catch with people like you. Oliver shook his head. No catch, just a genuine desire to help. You're a human being, deserving of dignity and compassion, just like anyone else. For a moment, silence enveloped the room, the weight of their conversation hanging heavily in the air. James's gaze dropped to the floor, lost in thought. I don't know if I can accept that, he finally admitted, his voice trembling slightly. Why not? Oliver pressed gently, desperate to bridge the gap between them. Because it feels foreign. I've spent years believing I didn't matter. Accepting help means opening up wounds I thought had healed, James replied, his voice thick with emotion. Oliver leaned back, processing the man's words. Maybe it's time to face those wounds. You don't have to do it alone. James met Oliver's gaze, searching for sincerity. And what if I let you down? Then we'll figure it out together, Oliver said, his voice steady. But you can't let fear dictate your life. Not anymore. As the rain continued to fall outside, the two men sat in the warmth of the apartment, the storm raging on but somehow feeling less daunting in the presence of shared vulnerability. In that moment, Oliver felt a connection forming, a bond that transcended their vastly different worlds. It was a fragile beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. The rain poured down in relentless sheets, drumming against the polished exterior of the mansion where the billionaire, Nathaniel Cole, resided. He had just returned from a high-profile charity gala, his tailored suit still crisp, albeit slightly damp from the unexpected downpour. As he stepped out of his car, he noticed a figure huddled beneath a nearby awning. A man, soaked to the bone, with unkempt hair and a beard that seemed to blend with the raindrops cascading down his face. Something in the man's eyes sparked a flicker of recognition in Nathaniel, an inexplicable connection that tugged at his heartstrings. He hesitated, then approached the man, who looked up with a weary gaze. Hey, do you need some help? Nathaniel asked, his voice low yet firm, breaking through the sound of the rain. The man blinked, clearly surprised by the question. Help? I just need to get out of the rain, he stammered, his voice rough from disuse. Come on then, Nathaniel urged, gesturing toward his car. I can't let you stay out here like this. With a hesitant nod, the man rose slowly, his body stiff and weary. As they drove through the slick streets to the mansion, Nathaniel stole glances at his passenger. The man was older than he had first thought, perhaps in his late 50s, with deep lines etched into his face that spoke of hardship and suffering. Once inside, Nathaniel offered him a towel and a warm drink, observing as the man wrapped the towel around his shoulders, shivering slightly. Thank you, the man said, his voice still gravelly. I didn't expect kindness. Nathaniel shrugged, trying to mask his discomfort with the situation. Everyone deserves a little kindness, especially on a night like this. Why were you out in the rain? The man sighed, his eyes drifting to the window where the rain continued to fall. I've been living on the streets for a while now, just trying to get by day to day. You get used to it after a while. I can't imagine, Nathaniel replied, his heart heavy. What happened? How did you end up like this? The man hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the decision to share his story. Life has a way of turning on you when you least expect it, he finally said. One minute, you're living the dream, and the next, it all slips through your fingers like sand. What do you mean? Nathaniel pressed, curious despite himself. I had a family once, the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. A wife I loved dearly and a son who meant the world to me. But then there was an accident. A car crash. I lost everything that day. Nathaniel felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of unease creeping in. I'm sorry to hear that. It must have been terrible. The man nodded, his gaze distant. You don't know the half of it. I woke up in the hospital with no memory of who I was or where I came from. They told me I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel that way. I spent years trying to piece my life back together, only to discover that my family had moved on, believing I was dead. Nathaniel's heart raced. The man's story was hauntingly familiar, echoing memories from his own childhood. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this encounter, something that connected them in an inexplicable way. What was your name? Nathaniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Henry, the man replied, looking directly into Nathaniel's eyes. Henry Walker. Nathaniel's mind raced. The name rang a bell, but he couldn't quite place it. He shook his head slightly, trying to dispel the fog clouding his thoughts. Henry, he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. And your son, what was his name? Lucas, Henry said, a soft smile crossing his lips. He was a bright boy, full of dreams. Do you know where he is now? Nathaniel asked, his curiosity piqued. I lost track of him long ago, Henry admitted, his expression turning somber. After I disappeared, I heard reports of him growing up, but I never had the courage to reach out. I didn't want to disrupt his life, knowing they thought I was dead. Nathaniel felt a mix of emotions swirling within him. Sympathy for Henry, confusion about the connection they might share, and a burgeoning sense of urgency to uncover the truth. As he listened to Henry's story, fragments of his own past began to resurface, memories he had buried deep within himself. Days turned into weeks as Henry stayed at the mansion. Nathaniel found himself increasingly drawn to the older man, their conversations growing deeper, exploring the pain of loss and the weight of regret. Henry often shared stories about his life before the accident, painting a picture of a loving family, a successful career, and the dreams he once held dear. I used to be someone, you know? Henry said one evening, nursing a cup of tea. I had plans, aspirations. I was a good father, or at least I tried to be. I thought I could give my son everything he needed. Nathaniel listened intently, his heart aching for the man before him. You still can, he said softly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. There's still time to reconnect, to find him. Henry shook his head, a shadow of despair crossing his features. I don't even know if he wants to see me. After all these years, he's built a life without me. I wouldn't blame him if he hated me for leaving. Nathaniel's mind raced with thoughts. He was determined to know more about Henry's past, to understand the man who had unknowingly shared so much of his own life. One night, while Henry slept, Nathaniel felt compelled to search through the older man's belongings, hoping to find answers hidden within. As he sifted through the few personal items Henry had, Nathaniel stumbled upon a worn leather wallet. He opened it cautiously, revealing a faded photograph tucked inside. The picture was old, torn at the edges, but the faces were still recognizable. A young woman with warm brown eyes, a boy with a cheeky grin, and a man who looked strikingly like Henry. A jolt of realization shot through Nathaniel. He recognized the boy's face, his own childhood self. The man in the picture was his father, the one he had believed had died in a tragic accident. Staggering back, he clutched the wallet tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. Henry, Nathaniel called out, his voice trembling with urgency. Henry stirred awake, blinking in confusion. What is it? He asked, his brow furrowing as he took in Nathaniel's expression. Look at this, Nathaniel said, holding the photograph out for Henry to see. The older man's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the image. Where did you find this? Henry asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It was in your wallet, Nathaniel replied, feeling the weight of the truth settling heavily between them. You're my father, aren't you? The silence that followed was deafening, filled with a mix of disbelief and raw emotion. Henry's hands trembled as he reached out to take the photograph. I thought you were gone," he murmured, tears welling in his eyes. "I never wanted to leave you or your mother." Nathaniel's heart raced as he processed the whirlwind of emotions crashing over him. "You're alive," he whispered, barely able to comprehend the reality before him. "All those years. I thought you were dead." Henry's face crumpled, the weight of the years lost pressing heavily upon them both. "I'm so sorry, Nathaniel. I never wanted you to suffer like this. I thought I was protecting you by staying away." In that moment, both men stood on the precipice of a truth that would change their lives forever. The storm outside raging as fiercely as the turmoil within their hearts. As the rain drummed softly against the windows of the grand mansion, the atmosphere inside was thick with an unspoken tension. The billionaire, Alexander, was seated on the edge of a plush leather sofa, his fingers nervously tapping against the armrest. Across from him, the man he had taken in, whom he still referred to as the homeless man in his mind, sat in an old, faded armchair, his eyes flickering with a mixture of weariness and something deeper, something that seemed to resonate with Alexander's own life experiences. The old man's name was Robert, but Alexander had yet to say it out loud. Instead, they had spent their evenings lost in conversation, sharing stories that seemed to hover in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. It was during these conversations that Robert had let slip fragments of his past, an accident that had stolen his identity, a woman who had been his world, and a child he had lost. Each mention of these memories struck a chord within Alexander, stirring emotions he thought long buried. "Sometimes I think about that day," Robert began, his voice low and gravelly. "The day everything changed. I was driving home, feeling on top of the world, and then it happened." He paused, his eyes clouding with a distant memory. "A truck. It came out of nowhere. I remember the screeching of tires, the sound of metal crunching. I woke up days later in a hospital, and my life was gone." Alexander leaned forward, his heart racing. "What happened to your family? Did you try to find them?" Robert shook his head slowly, a pained expression crossing his face. "I couldn't. I didn't even know who I was. When I finally pieced together some of my memories, I learned that they had thought I was dead. I didn't want to bring them pain, so I just faded away, thinking it was for the best." A silence settled between them, thick and suffocating. Alexander felt a knot form in his stomach. He swallowed hard, grappling with a sense of unease. "You lost your son," he said quietly, a question lingering in the air. "What was he like?" Robert's gaze drifted to the window, watching the rain dance against the glass. "He was a bright boy, full of dreams. When I left, he was just starting school, learning to ride a bike. I hoped he would grow up to be a good man." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "I failed him." "Failed him?" Alexander echoed, incredulous. "You didn't choose to disappear. You were taken from him." Robert turned to look at Alexander, the pain in his eyes cutting deep. "That's just it, son. I was given a second chance at life, but I lost the chance to be a father. I didn't want to disrupt the life he built without me. I thought he would be better off." Alexander's heart raced at the word son. It echoed in his mind, reverberating like a distant bell tolling the onset of a storm. "Why didn't you try harder? Why not fight to get back to him?" "Because I didn't know how," Robert replied, his voice thick with emotion. "The years went by, and I became a shell of the man I once was. I lost myself in the streets. The pain of my past caught up with me, and I became invisible to the world." A profound silence enveloped them as Alexander wrestled with the implications of Robert's words. He looked at the man before him, the worn face that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 regrets, and something inside him began to shift. "But you're here now," he said softly. "You're alive. Doesn't that count for something?" Robert let out a bitter laugh that held no humor. "Alive? Perhaps. But I'm not the man I was. I have no place in this world anymore. I'm just a ghost haunting the streets." The air was thick with sorrow, and Alexander felt a growing turmoil within him. He wanted to understand, to pull the threads of Robert's past together, but the more he listened, the more he felt the burden of his own life crashing down around him. "You were my father," he said suddenly, the words tumbling from his lips before he could stop them. "You're supposed to be here." Robert's gaze sharpened, surprise etched across his features. I didn't know if you'd want to hear that. I never wanted to impose on your life." Alexander felt anger rise within him, a tempest of emotions that he could no longer contain. "You didn't have a choice. You were taken from me." He took a deep breath, the weight of realization pressing down on him. "You were supposed to be there, but you vanished. You let us believe you were dead." "I thought it was best," Robert defended, his voice cracking. "I thought you would have a better life without the burden of my existence." "Burden?" Alexander spat, his heart racing. "You think I wouldn't have wanted my father in my life? I grew up without a family, without knowing who I was. You think I didn't feel that emptiness?" Robert's expression softened, the pain in his eyes morphing into something akin to understanding. "I never meant to hurt you, son. I wanted to protect you from the pain of my mistakes. It was the only choice I thought I had." Alexander shook his head, frustration boiling over. "You didn't protect me. You abandoned me. Do you even understand the impact that had on my life?" For a moment, the room was filled with silence as tension hung in the air. Robert looked down, guilt washing over his features. "I do now. I understand the loss, the grief. I've been living it every day, but I can't change what happened. I can only hope to make amends." "Amends?" Alexander echoed, his voice low and dangerous. "How do you plan to make amends? You think you can just walk back into my life and everything will be fine?" "I don't expect forgiveness," Robert replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just want a chance to be in your life again, if you'll allow me. To know you, to understand you." Alexander's heart was pounding in his chest, a mixture of rage and sadness swirling within him. He wanted to scream, to lash out at the man who had caused him so much pain, but somewhere deep down, he also longed for connection. "You don't get to just decide that," he said finally, his voice trembling. "You don't get to choose when you want to be a father. You lost that right." "I know," Robert said, tears brimming in his eyes. "But I want to try. I want to be there for you now, if you'll let me. I want to show you that I'm still here, that I'm still your father." The room fell silent again, the only sound the steady patter of rain against the window. Alexander felt a flicker of hope, battling against the weight of his anger. Could he truly allow this man, this stranger who was his father, back into his life? Would it be worth the risk? In that moment, Alexander realized that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was still unwritten. It was a terrifying thought, yet it also held a spark of possibility. I don't know if I can forgive you," he said slowly, his voice raw with emotion. "But maybe we can start somewhere. Maybe we can try to figure this out together." Robert's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope igniting within them. "Together?" he asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Yeah," Alexander replied, letting out a shaky breath. "Together. But it's going to take time, and I won't make it easy for you." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Robert said, a smile breaking through the sorrow etched on his face. "I'll take whatever time you give me, son." As they sat in the dimly lit room, a fragile understanding began to blossom between them. The road ahead would be fraught with difficulty, but for the first time, there was hope, a flicker of connection that promised the possibility of healing and rebuilding what had been lost. As rain drizzled softly against the large glass windows of the penthouse, creating a rhythmic symphony that filled the otherwise silent space. Inside, the billionaire, Ethan, sat on his plush leather couch, staring blankly at the wall, lost in a whirlpool of thoughts. The encounter with the homeless man, whom he had subsequently brought into his home, lingered in his mind like a haunting melody he couldn't shake off. Ethan's gaze drifted to the other side of the room, where the man, who introduced himself as Frank, was sitting in a chair, wrapped in one of Ethan's oversized blankets. His hair was matted and unkempt, and his clothes still bore the odor of the streets. Yet there was an undeniable spark of vitality in his eyes, a glint that both intrigued and unsettled Ethan. They had spent the last few days sharing meals and unspoken moments, but there was a lingering distance between them, a chasm filled with unaddressed questions. "Do you want some coffee?" Ethan asked suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice felt foreign in the quiet room, as if it were intruding upon a sacred space. Frank looked up, his eyes momentarily confused before a small smile crept across his face. "Sure, I'd love some," Frank replied, his voice raspy, a remnant of life spent in the elements. "Black, please." As Ethan brewed the coffee, the aroma filled the air, mingling with the scent of the rain outside. He poured 2 steaming mugs and joined Frank, who was now peering out the window as droplets cascaded down the glass. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Frank said, his tone light, but Ethan could sense an underlying weight. "More like a dreary one," Ethan replied, taking a sip. "But I suppose beauty can be found in the unexpected." He studied Frank's profile, his heart racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted to ask. "Yeah, that's true," Frank said, still gazing outside. "Sometimes the clouds bring out the brightest colors. They just need time." Ethan chuckled softly, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "You sound like a philosopher," he remarked, trying to lighten the mood. "What's your story, Frank? You mentioned something about an accident the other night." Frank turned to face him, his expression shifting from lightheartedness to something more solemn. "It's complicated, you know? Life has a way of twisting your path when you least expect it." Ethan leaned forward, intrigued. "I can't help but feel there's more to it. You said you lost someone important. I can relate to that." Frank's eyes darkened, and he took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into the depths of his memories. "I had a family once, a wife, a son, everything I could have ever wanted. But life is unpredictable. One moment you're on top of the world, and the next, you're lost in the shadows." "What happened?" Ethan pressed gently, sensing the raw pain in Frank's voice. "It was a car accident," Frank began, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I was driving home one rainy evening. Everything seemed normal until it wasn't. I lost control of the car. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital bed with no memories of who I was. They told me my family was gone." Ethan felt his heart constrict. "Gone?" Frank nodded, the weight of his words heavy in the air. "They thought I was dead. I didn't have any identification, no way to prove who I was. I wandered for years, trying to piece together the fragments of my life. But every time I got close, I was met with a wall of memories that wouldn't come back." Ethan's mind raced, fragments of his own past surfacing. A father he barely remembered, a mother who spoke of him in hushed tones. "And you never tried to find them?" he asked cautiously. "I did," Frank admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But when I finally regained some of my memories, I learned that my family had moved on. They had a funeral for me, mourned me as if I were gone. I couldn't bear the thought of disrupting their lives, especially knowing they had found a way to heal. Even if it meant living like this." Ethan gestured toward the room, his eyes searching Frank's face for understanding. Frank sighed, a deep, sorrowful sound that echoed in the silence. "I thought I could find my way back to them, to the man I used to be. But the streets, they change you. I lost myself along the way." Ethan leaned back, the weight of Frank's story settling heavily in his chest. "What about your son? Did you ever think about him? What would he think of you now?" The question slipped out before he could stop himself, a mix of curiosity and a strange sense of connection. Frank's expression faltered, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "Every day, I think about him, wonder what he's become, if he's happy. The thought of him living a life without me, it's unbearable. But I also know that the best thing I could do for him was to stay away. I didn't want to be a ghost haunting his life." A deep silence enveloped them, punctuated only by the soft patter of rain against the window. Ethan felt an odd kinship blooming between them, a thread connecting their shared pain, even if the details of their lives were worlds apart. "Sometimes," Ethan said slowly, "the past has a way of catching up with you, whether you want it to or not." His thoughts drifted to his own father, the man he had lost in the chaos of life, leaving a void that had never truly been filled. Frank glanced at him, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "You're right. It's like a shadow, always lingering. But it's how we respond to that shadow that defines us. Ethan nodded, absorbing Frank's words like a sponge. What if there's a way to reclaim what's lost? To confront those shadows rather than run from them? Frank's brow furrowed. What do you mean? I mean, Ethan began, a flicker of determination igniting within him. What if you could find your son? What if you could tell him the truth? You're still here. You're not just a ghost. You have a chance to reconnect, to be a part of his life, even if it's in a different way than before. Frank's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and fear swirling within them. You don't understand. What if he hates me? What if he's moved on completely? I wouldn't blame him. Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady and unwavering. But you'll never know unless you try. Life is unpredictable, yes, but so is love. You never know how someone might react until you take that leap of faith. Frank stared at Ethan, a tumultuous sea of emotions swirling behind his eyes. You really believe that? I do, Ethan replied earnestly, and I think it's time for both of us to face our pasts. We can't change what happened, but we can choose how we move forward. The room felt charged with an electric tension, the lingering rain outside mirroring the storm brewing within Frank. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, grappling with the weight of possibility and fear. Maybe you're right, he finally said, his voice soft but firm. But where do I even begin? Ethan smiled, feeling a surge of hope. We start with baby steps. Let's find out where he is, and then you can decide whether or not you want to reach out. As Frank processed Ethan's words, the rain began to let up, the clouds slowly parting to reveal a glimmer of sunlight breaking through. In that moment, both men felt a shift in their lives, a shared understanding that perhaps the shadows of their past could be confronted, not with fear but with courage and hope for a brighter future. In the dim light of the spacious study, the rain pounded against the large windows, creating a rhythm that matched the turmoil in the mind of the billionaire. He paced back and forth, each step echoing his mounting anxiety. The old, leather-bound tomes that lined the walls were mere distractions now. His thoughts were consumed by the man he had taken in just days before. The Mendigo, with his weathered skin and haunted eyes, stirred something deep within him, something he couldn't quite articulate. As the storm raged outside, Jack, the billionaire, cast a glance toward the couch where the man lay sleeping. Despite the tattered clothes and the grime that clung to him, there was an undeniable aura about him. Jack's heart raced with unexplainable emotions, a mixture of curiosity and dread. He had offered the man shelter out of a sudden impulse, but now that impulse was turning into an obsession. "Who are you?" Jack muttered under his breath as he rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the tension knotting there. The question was more than just a search for identity. It was a plea for understanding. The Mendigo had spoken of a life once lived, fragments of memories that hinted at a much deeper story. Jack felt a magnetic pull toward the truth. The rain began to slow, and a faint light broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow in the room. Jack's gaze fell upon a small box tucked away on a high shelf. It had been forgotten amidst the chaos of his high-powered lifestyle. Driven by an urge he couldn't explain, he reached for the box, dust motes dancing in the air as he pulled it down. Inside, he found an assortment of old family photographs and documents, relics of a time he had tried to bury deep within his memory. His hands trembled as he sifted through the contents, each item a reminder of a past he had long since moved on from. A photograph caught his eye, one that was slightly torn, the edges frayed and yellowed with age. He held it up to the light, squinting to make out the faces. "Wait," Jack whispered, his breath hitching in his throat. There, in the middle of the photograph, was a younger version of himself, standing beside a man whose features mirrored those of the Mendigo sleeping on his couch. The resemblance was uncanny, the same deep-set eyes, the same strong jawline. "No way!" Jack's heart raced as he began to piece together the fragments of his past. He quickly rifled through the papers again, pulling out a faded hospital document that detailed an accident. The words blurred as he read, his mind racing ahead of his comprehension. "Father!" Declared dead, he stumbled back, nearly dropping the photograph. The weight of the revelation crashed down upon him like a tidal wave. "No, it can't be," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The man he had taken in was not just a stranger. He was his father, the man Jack had believed was lost to him forever. As he stood frozen in shock, the Mendigo stirred. Jack quickly tucked the photograph back into the box, his mind racing with the implications of what he had discovered. The man shifted, rubbing his eyes as he woke up, confusion etched across his face. "Jack?" he croaked, his voice rough from sleep. What time is it?" It's morning," Jack managed to reply, his heart pounding. He was torn between the urge to confront the man and the instinct to protect himself from the emotional fallout that was sure to follow. "How are you feeling?" "Better, I think," the Mendigo replied, sitting up slowly. He looked around the room, taking in the luxurious surroundings that felt so alien to him. "This place, it's beautiful." Jack felt a surge of emotions, anger, confusion, and a flicker of hope. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steadying as he took a seat across from the man. "There are things we need to discuss." The Mendigo met his gaze, a wary expression crossing his face. "Is it about the past?" he asked softly. "Because I've been thinking a lot about it since I got here." "Yeah, it is," Jack replied, his heart racing. "I found something that changes everything." He hesitated, the photograph weighing heavily on his mind. "You mentioned losing your memory after the accident. What do you remember?" The Mendigo's brow furrowed as he thought for a moment. "I remember flashes, like a movie reel that's been damaged. I see a woman. She was beautiful and I loved her. I remember a child, my son, but it's all so jumbled. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces." "Your son!" Jack's voice trembled as he grasped the significance of the words. "What if I told you that I might be that son?" The Mendigo's eyes widened in surprise, confusion washing over his features. "What do you mean?" I think you're my father," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. A heavy silence hung in the air, laden with the weight of unspoken truths. The Mendigo's expression shifted from shock to disbelief, and then to a glimmer of hope. That's impossible," he stammered, shaking his head. "I thought you were just a kind man who took me in. I didn't think you were my son." "I found your photograph, Dad," Jack said, his heart pounding as he pulled the torn picture from the box. He handed it over with trembling hands, his breath hitching as he watched the realization dawn on the man's face. As the Mendigo studied the photograph, his eyes filled with tears. "I remember this. This was taken before the accident," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd see it again." Jack leaned forward, his heart racing. "What happened after the accident? Why didn't you come back?" "I thought I was dead," the Mendigo said, his voice barely a whisper. "When I woke up, I was in a different place, a hospital full of strangers. They told me I had lost my family in the accident. I couldn't bear the thought of them mourning someone who was still alive, so I stayed away. I thought it was for the best." Jack felt a mix of anger and sorrow as he listened to his father's words. "You should have tried to find us. Mom thought you were gone forever." "I know," the Mendigo replied, his voice strained. "But I didn't know how to face you, to face the pain I caused. I didn't want to disrupt the life you had built without me." The tension in the room was palpable, each man grappling with the depth of their shared history. Jack felt the weight of the years that had slipped away, the moments stolen from them both. "But I didn't get to choose, Dad. I grew up believing you were dead, and now we have a chance," the Mendigo interrupted, his voice filled with a newfound determination. "We can't change the past, but maybe we can rebuild what was lost." Jack searched his father's gaze, the flicker of hope igniting something deep within him. "I want to understand, to know you, but it won't be easy. There's so much pain." "I know," the Mendigo replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "But I'm willing to try. For you, for us." As they sat there, the rain began to subside, the sun breaking through the clouds, casting a warm light into the room. It felt as though the promise of a new beginning was shining down upon them, illuminating the path they could forge together. They were two souls, forever intertwined by the threads of fate, ready to navigate the rocky terrain of their shared past and carve out a future that was theirs alone. As rain poured steadily outside, the sound echoing against the glass windows of the luxurious penthouse, the atmosphere inside was thick with unspoken tension. The billionaire, Marcus Ashford, sat at his polished mahogany desk, staring blankly at the photograph he had just discovered. His heart raced as he held the faded image, a fragment of the past that felt impossibly heavy in his hands. The photo depicted a family, captured in a moment of happiness, a woman with a soft smile, a young boy with bright eyes, and a man whose face was only partially visible, the corner torn and frayed. That man, he realized, was not just a stranger. He was the homeless man he had taken in just days ago. A sense of disbelief washed over him. How could it be possible? The man he had offered shelter to, the man he had begun to feel an inexplicable connection with, was his father. The father he had mourned for decades. Marcus could hardly breathe as the weight of the revelation settled heavily on his chest. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, urging him to confront the man who had been living on the streets all these years. Marcus glanced over at the sofa, where the older man, now known to him as Elijah, was sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the storm of emotions swirling around Marcus's mind. The sight of Elijah's worn face, lined with the marks of hardship and suffering, sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. This was his father, the same man who had disappeared after a tragic accident that had left Marcus an orphan. The thought that the man was right there, beneath his roof, was both comforting and deeply unsettling. He stood abruptly, pacing the room as he attempted to piece together the fragments of his childhood memories. The stories his mother had told him, the way she had grieved, the void that had been left in their lives. It all rushed back to him in a chaotic wave. Marcus felt anger bubble up within him, along with a profound sense of betrayal. How could Elijah have just vanished? Why hadn't he reached out? After several minutes of internal turmoil, Marcus took a deep breath and made his way toward the sofa. He stood over Elijah, watching him sleep, the man's chest rising and falling with each breath. Marcus felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. Finally, he could no longer hold back the torrent of feelings that had been building within him. He gently shook Elijah's shoulder, his voice strained with urgency. "Wake up," he demanded, his tone sharper than he intended. Elijah stirred, blinking up at Marcus with bleary eyes. Confusion washed over his features as he sat up slowly, his mind still foggy from sleep. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Marcus held the photograph out in front of him, his hand trembling slightly. "This," he said, his voice quaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Who is this man?" Elijah squinted at the photo, recognition flickering in his eyes as he reached for it, his fingers brushing against Marcus's. I don't understand," he stammered, his brow furrowing. "Look closely," Marcus pressed, his frustration bubbling over. "This is you, isn't it? And that's me, as a child. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe you were dead?" Elijah's eyes widened in shock. I didn't know," he exclaimed, his voice cracking. "I lost my memory after the accident. I didn't know where I was, who I was. I thought you were better off without me." "Better off?" Marcus shot back, his voice rising. "You have no idea what it was like growing up without a father. I spent years wondering what happened to you, wondering if I was somehow to blame. And now you're here, living on the streets, and you didn't even try to find me." Elijah looked down, his shoulders slumping under the weight of Marcus's words. "I wanted to," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I tried. But when I learned that you had moved on, that your mother had remarried, I thought it was better to stay away. I didn't want to disrupt your life." "Disrupt my life?" Marcus echoed incredulously, the pain in his chest tightening. "You think that's what you did? You disappeared. You left me alone to deal with the fallout, to wonder what I had done wrong to lose you. You have no idea what it felt like to grow up without knowing if you were alive or dead." Elijah's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he absorbed his son's words. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," he said, his voice trembling. I didn't choose this life. I lost everything in that accident. My memories, my family, my identity. I was a ghost, wandering through life without knowing who I was. Marcus felt a pang of sympathy, but it was buried beneath layers of hurt and resentment. So you just accepted it? You let yourself become this shadow of a man? I can't just forget everything that happened because you lost your way. I didn't forget you. Elijah's voice rose, filled with desperation. I thought of you every day. It was like a piece of me was missing, and I couldn't find it again. I wanted to come back, but I was scared. Scared of what you would think of me. Scared of what I had become. Silence hung heavily in the air as Marcus processed Elijah's words. His heart ached with a mix of anger and compassion as he saw the pain etched on his father's face. The weight of the years apart pressed down on both of them, and for the first time, Marcus felt a flicker of understanding. It's hard for me to see you like this, Marcus admitted, his voice quieter now, the anger slowly ebbing away. You were supposed to be my father, not a stranger on the street. Elijah nodded, tears spilling down his weathered cheeks. I know I failed you. I failed myself, but I'm here now. I'm trying to make sense of it all. I never wanted to hurt you. The sincerity in Elijah's voice pierced through Marcus's defenses, causing him to falter. He took a step back, his mind racing. Could he truly forgive the man sitting before him? The man who had caused him so much pain yet had also suffered himself? Why didn't you come back when you remembered? Marcus asked, his voice softer now, a hint of vulnerability creeping in. I was afraid, Elijah replied, his gaze steady. Afraid of being rejected, afraid of the life I had lost. I thought I had nothing to offer you. I was a broken man, and I didn't want to bring you down with me. Marcus swallowed hard, the tumult of emotions swirling within him. He felt a small part of his heart begin to crack open, allowing a sliver of empathy to seep through. I can't just forget the years of pain, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. But maybe we can start a rebuild something. Elijah looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. I would like that more than anything, he said softly. I know it will take time, but I want to be in your life again. I want to be your father, even if it's late. Marcus took a deep breath, the complexities of their relationship looming large in his mind. The journey to healing would not be easy, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was a journey worth taking. As rain poured down relentlessly outside the large, opulent windows of the penthouse, the sound of the storm echoed through the quiet space. The atmosphere inside was thick with tension as the billionaire, Michael, paced back and forth. His heart raced, each beat resonating with the tumultuous emotions swirling within him. He had spent countless nights in this luxurious abode, surrounded by wealth and comfort, yet never had he felt so profoundly unsettled. His eyes fell upon the figure slumped on the plush couch, a man whose presence had inexplicably woven itself into the fabric of Michael's life over the past few days. The man, Ben, was his father, though Michael had only just uncovered that truth. The reality of their connection sat like a stone in his stomach. How could the man before him, disheveled and bearing the weight of years spent on the streets, be the same man he had mourned for so long? Why didn't you tell me? Michael's voice cut through the silence, sharp and accusing. The question hung in the air, laced with pain and disbelief. He stopped pacing and fixed his gaze on Ben, who stirred slightly but didn't meet his eyes. I didn't know how, Ben replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He shifted uncomfortably, the shadows of his past flickering across his face like the lightning outside. I thought I was dead, at least that's what everyone believed. Michael's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You were given up for dead. You just let me think you were gone forever. Do you have any idea how that felt? Growing up without a father? The bitterness in Michael's voice was palpable. Ben finally looked up, his eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and resignation. I didn't want to hurt you, Michael. I thought it would be better if you didn't know. I didn't want to disrupt your life. Disrupt my life? Michael echoed, incredulous. You think it would have been better to leave me in ignorance? To let me mourn someone who was alive all along? He stepped closer, his heart racing with a blend of anger and confusion. You have no idea what I've gone through. what it's been like to grow up without you. I do know, Ben said, his voice shaking. I lived without you. I tried to come back, but when I learned that everyone believed I was dead, I thought it would be kinder to stay away. I didn't want to interfere with the life you built. I didn't want to be the ghost that haunted you. Michael's breath hitched as he processed Ben's words. The longing and grief that had festered in his heart for years battled against the anger that surged within him. You think staying away was easier for me? Do you have any idea how many times I wished you were there? How many times I needed you? I can't change the past, Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. I lost my memory for so long. I didn't even know who I was. The accident, it took everything from me. I wandered, lost, like a ghost. When I finally started to remember, I thought it was too late. I couldn't come back. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing you again, only to have you resent me for abandoning you. Michael's chest tightened as he listened. The pain in Ben's voice resonated with the sorrow he had carried for years. You think I would have resented you? I needed you. How could you not have tried harder to come back? Believe me, I tried, Ben replied, tears welling in his eyes. But the more I remembered, the more I realized I had become a stranger to you, a man with no place in your life. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. Protecting me? Michael's voice cracked, the weight of his emotions threatening to spill over. You were my father. You were supposed to be there. Instead, you chose to hide while I struggled with the loss of you. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the rain continued to pour, but inside, the storm was one of a different kind. An emotional tempest that threatened to unravel everything. Ben's face crumpled, and he finally allowed the tears to fall. I'm so sorry, Michael. I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to come back, but I thought you were better off without me. Michael shook his head, frustration mingling with sorrow. Better off? You think I'm better off as a man who grew up with a void where you should have been? I had everything, money, success, but I was never whole. I was always searching for something I couldn't name. And now, here you are, and I don't know what to do with this. This reality that you're alive, but you're not the man I needed. I know I'm not the man you needed, Ben said, his voice breaking. I've changed. The streets changed me, and I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I've always loved you, even when I was too lost to show it. Michael's heart ached at the confession. It was a truth he desperately wanted to believe, but the years of absence loomed large between them. Love doesn't excuse abandonment, he said quietly, the fight in him beginning to wane. You broke my heart when you disappeared. Ben nodded, the weight of Michael's words settling heavily on him. I know, and I can't take that back. All I can do is stand here and hope you can find a way to forgive me. He paused, his voice trembling. I'm still your father, whether you want me to be or not. I'm here now, and I want to be part of your life again, if you'll let me. Part of my life? Michael scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You think it's that easy? Do you have any idea how hard it is to trust again? I don't expect it to be easy, Ben replied earnestly, but I'm willing to fight for us, for the chance to be your father again. I can't change the past, but I can try to make the future better, if you'll allow me. The storm outside raged on, but within the penthouse, a different kind of storm brewed. One of emotions, revelations, and a fragile hope. Michael's heart wrestled with the conflicting feelings clawing at him. The father he had longed for was standing right in front of him, yet the bitterness of abandonment still stung sharply. I don't know if I can do this, Michael finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can just forgive and forget. You were gone for so long. It feels like a lifetime. I understand, Ben said softly, his eyes brimming with tears. I'll give you all the time you need. Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere this time. I want to make things right, even if it takes a lifetime. Michael felt the weight of his father's gaze, the sincerity in his words igniting a flicker of hope within him. Perhaps their journey wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he could see a path forward, a chance to rebuild what had been lost. He took a deep breath, determined to navigate the tumultuous waters of their relationship one step at a time. The dim light of the room cast long shadows across the walls, flickering as the wind rustled the branches outside. The air was thick with tension, heavy with unsaid words and raw emotions. The billionaire, still reeling from the discovery that the man sitting in front of him was his biological father, felt a storm brewing within him. His heart raced, half in anger and half in disbelief. "Why didn't you come back?" he demanded. His voice low but edged with a sharpness that could cut through glass. He leaned forward, his eyes locked onto the weathered face of the man who had once been his father. "You had the chance. You could have tried to find us." The mendigo, his father, looked down at his hands, calloused and trembling. It had been years since he had felt the warmth of a family, the touch of love, or the weight of responsibility. He exhaled slowly, summoning the courage to meet his son's gaze. "I wanted to. I really did." His voice was hoarse, a mere whisper of the strength it once held. "But after the accident, everything changed. I couldn't remember who I was. I was lost." The billionaire crossed his arms defensively, unwilling to soften in the face of his father's pain. "You were lost? What about us? What about me? I grew up thinking I had no father, that you were dead. And then I find you like this." He gestured around the room, at the sparse furnishings, at the man who was now a shadow of the father he had envisioned as a child. "I know," the mendigo replied, his voice cracking. "I didn't want to interfere with the life you had built without me. I was afraid of the pain it would cause you and your mother. When I found out you were okay, I thought it was better this way." "Better?" The word exploded from the billionaire's lips, echoing in the cramped space. "Do you have any idea how it felt to grow up without you? To see other kids with their fathers and wonder why mine wasn't there? You think this was better for me?" His father flinched at the intensity of his son's words. "I never wanted you to suffer, but what choice did I have? I was a ghost, a man without a name or a past. I didn't want to haunt your life, but you did haunt my life." The billionaire's voice broke, the weight of grief and anger crashing over him like a tidal wave. "You haunted my every thought, every moment. I built my life on the assumption that I was alone, that I had no one. And now you're here, and I don't know what to feel." The mendigo's eyes glistened with unshed tears, reflecting the hurt and regret etched deep within his soul. "I'm sorry," he murmured, the words barely escaping his lips. "I tried to survive. I thought about you every single day. I wanted to come back, but I was afraid of what I would find. I didn't know if you would hate me, or if you would even remember me." The billionaire clenched his jaw, his heart torn between the anger he felt and the flicker of sympathy that began to light within him. "You should have tried. You should have fought harder. I would have understood. Maybe I could have helped you." The mendigo shook his head, a sorrowful smile flickering across his face. "You were just a child. How could I put that burden on you? I couldn't taint your life with my misery. I thought I was protecting you, but in reality, I was just protecting myself from the pain of facing the truth." "Protecting yourself?" The billionaire scoffed, disbelief flooding his voice. "You left me alone, with no one to turn to. You think that's protection? You think leaving me to wonder was better than facing the truth?" "I know it was wrong," his father admitted, his voice cracking with the weight of his remorse. "I thought about what I would say to you if I found you. Would you even want to see me? Would you welcome me back into your life after everything?" The billionaire's breath hitched, his mind racing with confusion and frustration. "I don't know. I don't know what I would have felt, but I would have wanted the chance to choose. To know you were alive, to understand what happened. Not like this, not after all these years." "You have to understand," the mendigo said, his voice trembling with emotion. "After the accident, I lost everything. My identity, my family, my will to live. I wandered the streets, a shell of who I used to be. I never wanted you to see me like this." "Like what?" the billionaire shot back, his tone laced with bitterness. "A homeless man? A stranger? You think I care about that? I care about you, about who you were and who you could have been." The mendigo looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and longing. "I was a different man back then. I had dreams and ambitions. But sometimes, life takes you down a path you never expected. I lost everything in a moment, and I didn't know how to find my way back. Did you even try?" The billionaire's voice was laced with desperation. "Did you search for us? Did you look for me? For my mother?" "I did," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "When I started to regain my memory, I searched for you. But every time I got close, I found myself backing away. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing you, of knowing what I had lost." The billionaire's heart twisted painfully in his chest. "So you just gave up? You let the streets swallow you whole instead of fighting for your family?" "I thought it was better for you," his father insisted, his voice breaking. "I thought you would be better off without me." "Better off?" The billionaire's voice rose again, filled with incredulity. "You have no idea what it's like to grow up wondering if you were even real, to feel that gaping hole where a father should be. You could have been there for me. You could have tried." "And I failed," the Mendigo replied, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I failed you, and I can't change that. But I'm here now. Please, let me try to make it right. Let me be a part of your life again, if you'll let me." The billionaire's heart ached at his father's plea, but the chasm of years lost and pain felt insurmountable. "I don't know if I can trust you," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "You're a stranger to me." "I understand," the Mendigo said softly, "but I'm still your father. I may be broken, but I'm here, and I want to be a part of your life again, even if it's just a small part. Let me show you who I am now." For a long moment, silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. The billionaire's mind raced with conflicting emotions, the weight of his father's words pressing heavily upon his shoulders. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as he grappled with the reality of the man before him. Just tell me everything," he finally said, his voice cracking. "Tell me about the accident, about my mother, about everything you remember." The Mendigo nodded, his expression softening. "All right," he replied, drawing a shaky breath. "It all started on a rainy night, much like this one." The air in the lavish penthouse was thick with unspoken words and lingering tension. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a gentle glow on the polished marble floor, yet the warmth of the day could not penetrate the chill between the two men. At a distance, the billion-dollar view of the city skyline was stunning, but neither of them was paying attention to it. Instead, they stood in the living room, separated by years of unresolved pain and a fragile thread of renewed connection. "Why didn't you come back?" The question slipped from David's lips, raw and edged with emotion. He paced back and forth, his designer shoes tapping rhythmically against the marble. "For decades, I thought you were dead. I buried that part of my life. And now you just show up like nothing happened?" Across the room, the man who had once been a ghost of David's past, now standing flesh and blood before him, looked down at the floor. Gary, his father, had shed the rags of a homeless life for a moment, but the remnants of that existence clung to him like shadows. His hair was still unkempt, his skin weathered from years of exposure, and the lines around his eyes told stories of hardship that were far too real. "I didn't know how to come back, David," Gary finally said, his voice thick with regret. "After the accident, everything went dark. I lost myself. I didn't even know who I was for years." He paused, swallowing hard. "When I found out you were alive, I couldn't bring myself to intrude on your life. I thought it would be better this way." "Better?" David shot back, disbelief lacing his words. "You think abandoning me, abandoning us, was better? Do you have any idea what that did to me? To my mother?" His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Every birthday, every holiday, I waited for you. I searched for you in every face I passed on the street, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, you would walk through the door." Gary's expression crumbled as he looked up, pain etched into his features. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was trying to protect you. I didn't want you to see me like this." He gestured to himself, the frailty of his existence hanging heavily in the air. "The man you see now, he's not the father you remember." David's heart wavered at the sight of the man who had once filled his childhood with laughter and stories. The memories flooded back: fishing trips, bedtime tales, the smell of fresh pancakes on Sunday mornings. But those memories were now shrouded in the trauma of abandonment. "You could have tried," he murmured, his voice breaking. "You could have reached out. You could have fought for us. But instead, you chose to disappear." "I thought about it every day," Gary admitted, his voice trembling. "Every single day. But I was afraid. Afraid that you would hate me for what I had become, for the life I was forced to live. I didn't want you to see me as the failure I felt I was." "Failure?" David echoed, incredulous. "You think living on the streets is a failure? You think that running away and leaving your family behind is a failure? You should have fought to come back. You should have fought for me." Tears glistened in Gary's eyes, and he took a step forward, breaking the distance that had felt insurmountable just moments before. "David, I was broken. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I didn't want to drag you into my misery." David's heart softened just a fraction at the sight of his father's pain. "You have no idea how alone I felt," he whispered, the fight starting to drain from him. "I had to grow up without you. I built a life out of your absence. I achieved everything I have because I wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed without you. But now, standing here, I realize that I was always waiting for you to come back, to say that you loved me, that you cared." "I do love you," Gary said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've loved you every day since I last saw you. I never stopped. It was the one thing that kept me going through those dark years. I thought of you often. I imagined what you were doing, how you were growing up. I was proud of you always." "Proud of me?" David scoffed, but it lacked any real venom. "You don't get to be proud after disappearing for decades." "I know." Gary's shoulders slumped as he spoke. "I know I have no right to claim that pride. But it's the truth, David. You were my light in the darkest of times. I didn't know how to come back." Silence hung between them once more, heavy and suffocating, before David finally looked directly into his father's eyes. "How do we fix this? I don't know if I can just forget everything. I don't know if I can just accept you back into my life after all that's happened." "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Gary replied, his voice softening. "I wouldn't blame you if you never could. But I want to try. I want to be part of your life again, even if it takes time. I want to be your father again, in whatever way that means now." David hesitated, torn between the desire to lash out or embrace the man who had returned from the dead. "It's not that simple," he finally said. "You don't just get to walk back in and act like everything is fine. I've built walls to protect myself." "I understand," Gary said, his eyes pleading. "I'm willing to break those walls down, brick by brick, if you let me. Just give me a chance, David. I'm not the same man who left. I've changed. I've suffered, and I've learned. I want to be better for you." David exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. Could he really allow this man back into his life? Could he risk the pain of possible rejection again? "I don't know if I can," he admitted, "but I'm willing to try if you are." Gary nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I will do whatever it takes, son. Just tell me what you need." The air in the room shifted slightly, the tension softening as David felt a sliver of hope creeping back into his heart. "Let's start with honesty," he said, his voice steadier now. "Tell me everything. No more secrets. I need to understand who you are now, what you've been through." And so they began, father and son, two souls entwined by blood but separated by fate, embarking on a journey to rebuild the relationship that had been shattered long ago. The path ahead was uncertain, but with each shared story, each whispered confession, they stepped closer to the possibility of healing, their once broken bond slowly starting to mend. As weeks passed since the fateful confrontation that unraveled the tangled threads of their past, both the billionaire and the homeless man found themselves navigating a complex landscape of emotions. Beneath the glittering facade of wealth and success, the billionaire, Jonathan, was a man grappling with a profound sense of loss and a burgeoning desire for connection. Across from him, David, his father, was a shadow of the man he once was, yet still held a flicker of the vibrant spirit that had once filled Jonathan's childhood with life and laughter. One crisp morning, a gentle light filtered through the grand windows of Jonathan's penthouse, casting soft shadows on the plush furniture. The air was filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Jonathan stood by the kitchen counter, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of his mug. He had almost forgotten the taste of simple things like coffee, the connection of making it himself rather than having it served on a silver platter. Today, however, felt different. Today, he was determined to extend a hand, to truly welcome David into his life. "David," Jonathan called, his voice echoing slightly in the vastness of the penthouse. "Come and have some coffee. I made it just how you like it, strong and black." David, still getting accustomed to the luxuries of Jonathan's home, shuffled in from the adjoining living room, his once ragged clothes now replaced with a pair of comfortable sweatpants and a soft sweater Jonathan had found for him. His hair, though still unkempt, had been washed, and his face bore the marks of a man who was slowly reclaiming his dignity. He hesitated at the doorway, a blend of uncertainty and gratitude etched across his features. Are you sure?" David asked, his voice laced with caution. "I don't want to impose. I mean, I'm not used to this." Jonathan turned to him, his expression softening. "You're not imposing, Dad. You're family. It's time we start acting like it." The word family hung between them, heavy with meaning. David's eyes glimmered with unshed tears, and for a moment, he was lost in the depths of Jonathan's gaze. A connection, fragile yet undeniable, pulsated between them, a bridge slowly being built over the chasms of their past. "All right," David finally acquiesced, stepping cautiously toward the kitchen. "I appreciate it, Jonathan. I really do." As they settled at the kitchen island, Jonathan poured coffee into 2 mugs, the steam curling upwards in delicate tendrils. He slid one toward David, who accepted it with a nod, his fingers trembling slightly around the warm ceramic. They sat in a silence that was both comfortable and charged, the weight of their shared history enveloping them like a heavy blanket. "Have you thought about what you might want to do next?" Jonathan asked, breaking the silence as he took a sip of his coffee. "I mean, now that you're here with me." David looked down into his mug, the dark liquid swirling like the thoughts in his mind. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I've spent so long surviving, just trying to get through each day. It feels strange to think about a future, a real future." "Then let's take it one step at a time," Jonathan suggested, leaning forward, his eyes determined. "How about we start with something simple? You could help me with my charity work. You have so much experience with the struggles people face. Your perspective could make a real difference." David lifted his gaze, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You want me to help you with your charity?" "Absolutely," Jonathan replied, a smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "You understand the world from a viewpoint I can't. I've always been on the other side of the fence, and I want to learn from you." The sincerity in Jonathan's voice struck a chord deep within David. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of purpose ignite within him. "I'd like that," he said slowly, a smile creeping onto his weathered face. "I'd really like that." Their conversation flowed more easily after that, each shared story and laugh stitching together the fabric of their newfound relationship. As the morning slipped into afternoon, Jonathan suggested they take a walk around the city, a tour of sorts, showing David the places that had shaped his life since their separation. "Let's get outside," Jonathan proposed, standing up and stretching. "It's a beautiful day, and I have some places I want to show you. You'll love the park nearby." David nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Lead the way, son." As they stepped outside, the crisp air filled their lungs, invigorating and alive with the sounds of the city. Jonathan pointed out landmarks, sharing stories from his childhood, each memory tinged with the bittersweet knowledge of what could have been had David remained in his life. They wandered through the bustling streets, Jonathan animatedly describing his favorite spots, while David marveled at the vibrancy of a world he had been so far removed from. "Over there is the old library I used to visit," Jonathan said, gesturing toward a grand building with towering columns. "I spent countless hours buried in books, dreaming of adventures far away. I always wished I could share that with you." "I wish I could have been there," David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm here now. Maybe we can create new stories together." They continued walking, eventually reaching the park, a lush oasis amidst the concrete jungle. Children played on swings, couples strolled hand in hand, and the laughter of families filled the air. Jonathan and David found a quiet bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, the leaves whispering secrets in the gentle breeze. As they sat, Jonathan pulled out his phone, scrolling through pictures until he found one that made his heart race. "Look at this," he said, turning the screen toward David. It was a photograph of their family, a moment frozen in time from years ago, before the accident had torn them apart. David's breath hitched as he gazed at the faces, his own younger self standing beside a woman who had once filled his life with love and laughter. That's us," he murmured, tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. "Yeah," Jonathan affirmed softly, a lump forming in his throat. "I want to rebuild this. I want to restore what we lost." In that moment, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden hues over the park, they shared an unspoken understanding. Father and son, once strangers, now bound by blood and history, were ready to embrace the future together. "Let's take it one day at a time," David said, a newfound strength in his voice. "Together." Jonathan nodded, a smile spreading across his face, the weight of their past lifting just enough to allow hope to flourish. "Together," he echoed, and they sat in the fading light, no longer just a billionaire and a homeless man, but a father and son, ready to forge a new path, hand in hand.